For as long as you've been alive, you've been told a lie. A lie so ordinary, so deeply woven into modern life that almost nobody ever questions it. You've been told that inflation is normal, that it's healthy, that it's simply part of a growing economy. But what if inflation isn't an accident at all? What if it's a two-land invisible mechanism that quietly drains your wealth without your permission, without your awareness, and without leaving any fingerprints behind? Today, you're about to see how inflation became the perfect crime. A crime governments and central banks have mastered so thoroughly that most people never even realize they read the victims. And the most disturbing part, it works so smoothly that even financial experts often refuse to call it what it truly is: legalized theft. The deeper you go, the more you'll realize inflation is not an economic feature. It's a strategy. To uncover how this happened, we need to travel back in time, long before dollars were printed by the trillions. In ancient societies, money wasn't a symbol, it was a promise backed by something real: gold, silver, grain, livestock, hard assets that couldn't be created out of thin air. No ruler, no king, no emperor could simply decree that 5 new piles of gold would appear by morning. Nature set the limits. But as governments grew and central banks emerged, especially in the early 1900s, leaders discovered something extraordinary. If you separate money from real value, you unlock a power no civilization had ever controlled before. In 1913, when the United States created the Federal Reserve, almost nobody understood the long-term consequences. Over decades, a system evolved where money was no longer a physical resource, became a controlled illusion. And once money became elastic, manipulable, and printable, governments found a way to tax people without ever raising tax rates. They found inflation. At first, inflation wasn't designed as a weapon. Economic thinkers of the 1800s warned endlessly that tampering with the money supply would destabilize societies. But then came wars, depressions, and crisis events, so large that governments turned to printing money as the easiest solution. World War I, the Great Depression, World War II. Each of these triggered enormous expansions in money creation. The public saw these expansions as relief, or stimulus, or stability. Governments saw them as policy. The truth, however, was simple. Every time new money entered the economy without new wealth being created, prices rose. And rising prices were not an unintended side effect. They were the entire mechanism, because every newly printed dollar silently diluted the value of the dollars already in circulation. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't violent. It wasn't obvious. It was slow, quiet erosion. By the 1970s, inflation became the new playbook. In 1971, President Richard Nixon severed the final link between the US dollar and gold. Overnight, money stopped being a physical promise and became a digital abstraction backed by nothing but trust in the government. Without gold restricting supply, governments could now create unlimited dollars with a keystroke. And from that moment on, inflation wasn't just a phenomenon, it was policy. Suddenly, every part of life got more expensive. Wages stagnated, but housing exploded. Education soared. Healthcare became unaffordable. Debt became normal. People felt the pressure, but they didn't connect the dots. They thought it was globalization, or competition, or corporate greed. Few realized the deeper truth. It wasn't the economy that changed, it was the money. Year after year, the value of savings shrank. The average American, working just as hard as their parents or grandparents, could afford far less. Yet officials insisted everything was under control because inflation stayed within target ranges. What they didn't reveal was how inflation as measured had been changed to make the numbers look smaller than reality. Essential costs like housing, food, and fuel were downplayed or excluded. Inflation didn't just rise, was disguised. And still, the crime continued. A 3% inflation rate cuts the purchasing power of your money in half over a lifetime. A 7% rate cuts it in half in just a decade. A 15% rate can wipe out a nation's savings in 5 years. But inflation doesn't hurt everyone equally. It has winners and very clear losers. Governments win because inflation makes their enormous debts cheaper to repay. Banks win because they lend newly created money and get paid back in interest. Large asset holders win because their stocks, real estate, and investments inflate in price alongside inflation. Meanwhile, ordinary people, the ones earning wages, saving for retirement, or keeping emergency funds in cash, lose every single day. Their money is worth less this month than it was last month, less this year than last year, and less over their entire lifetime than they ever expected. The biggest losers are those who trust the system the most. Over time, inflation changes the psychology of a nation. People stop saving. They stop planning. They stop believing the future will be more affordable than the present. Homeownership becomes a fantasy. Retirement becomes a myth. Debt becomes a way of life. And slowly, quietly, inflation transforms free citizens into dependents of the very system that caused their financial instability. History shows what happens when inflation runs wild. Weimar Germany dissolved into chaos as money became worthless. Zimbabwe's currency became meaningless as prices doubled daily. Argentina's inflation is so severe that prices change between morning and night. In every case, governments acted shocked even, though their printing policies created the disaster. And when inflation gets out of control, politicians promise fixes, raising interest rates, freezing prices, or cutting taxes. But these fixes are half measures. Inflation is built into the architecture of the modern financial system. To stop it, governments would need to spend less, print less, and borrow less. But no modern political system is built for discipline. It is built for promises, spending, and cycles of stimulus. Every crisis is solved by creating more money. Every solution creates the next crisis. Today, the pattern continues. Healthcare is up 900%. Yet, governments insist inflation is low. They insist everything is stable. But the truth is visible everywhere. In grocery bills, in rent, in medical costs, in shrinking savings accounts, and in the growing sense that something is terribly wrong. There are three takeaways you must understand. First, inflation is not natural. Second, inflation transfers wealth upward. And third, inflation keeps people dependent. Inflation is not a storm you wait out. It is not a temporary inconvenience. It is a feature of the system, one that will last as long as the people who benefit from it stay in control. The greatest danger is not that inflation destroys money. The greatest danger is that inflation destroys options. 8. Limits your choices. 8. Steals your time. It locks you into a system designed to keep you struggling while others profit. If you care about protecting your wealth, your future, and your freedom, then now is the time to question the financial system you were raised to trust. And if you want deeper investigations into money history, global debt, central banking secrets, and the hidden forces shaping your financial reality, then make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the next major economic shock is already forming in once again. Most people won't see it until it hits.